So hi everyone, I'm Fern, I'm Head of Student Engagement. We also have Josh here today and Alice from our communications team as well. So today we're going to run through some manifesto examples. Oh, I think we've got someone connecting.
Yeah.
Just got a couple more people joining, Fern.
Yeah, no worries. We'll just wait for them. Brilliant.
All the merrier. Hello.
Hi everyone. So we're here today to talk a bit about manifestos and give you some advice and guidance on how you can make your manifesto stand out, really. So I'm Fern, I'm Head of Student Engagement. We also have Josh here, the Representation and Democracy Manager, and Alice, our Communications Manager.
Okay, so today we're going to go through some manifestos with you, some example of some good and bad manifestos, pick out what's good and bad about them, and we're going to talk about if you're having trouble writing a manifesto, some things to consider, some things to do, some things not to do, and some current issues now in the sector which might be good for you to think about when doing your manifesto. It's important to remember that, like, whilst we're going through this, like, you need to write your manifesto in your own way. You know, it needs to reflect who you are as a person. It needs to reflect what you believe is important to you. Ours are just guidelines that we're giving to you, basically. But yeah, with that being said, it would probably be good to get going. If you have any questions, just stick them in the chat and we'll come to them when we can at the end. If we run out of time or anything, I'll get back to you. I'll drop you an email with an answer. Okay. Alice, am I able to share my screen? Thank you. Okay, cool. Can everyone see that? Perfect. Okay, so I will be talking first. Here, this will all be posted on the Candidate Hub, like I said, and all the example manifestos will be posted, so you'll be able to take a look in more detail at a later date. But I'm just going to pick up what was good about this manifesto first, so you can understand why it was good and what they've picked up on. So what they've done well is they've highlighted their key manifesto points throughout. So they've obviously highlighted that there's a full campus of food and drink, and more social spaces, prominent present union. So they have highlighted why they want to run. They've highlighted why having a good student union is a part of that. They have started strongly with their manifesto point here. They started with their making it cheaper to eat on campus. What they've done really well throughout is that not only have they highlighted what their key manifesto point is, they've then explained what they would do and where they would go. So instead of just like saying they would like to have cheaper food and drink on campus, they've said where they would like to have that. They have highlighted how they would represent you. So as a sabbatical officer, they have highlighted that as a head of student voice, they would try to make it as simple as possible to students where they are available, and what that would entail is really important in a good manifesto. They picked up on a point which they've done their research on, because they've picked up on the point that having a student union present with the officers moving from where they used to be back in, can't remember the building name, but where they are now. They obviously knew that was happening, so they could say this was a manifesto point. They could say, you know, I would like to help like make this go quicker, and so it's something that they can achieve easily. Making your manifesto about points which are achievable is really important. We will come onto this later on, but having achievable manifesto points is so important. Don't go promising the world when you can't deliver. And then at the end, they've just quickly gone over who they are a little bit, so that they were third year. They spent time listening to and representing a large number of course reps, and so they know the demands, and they know, and they feel like this places them well as the above on being a good head of student voice. You want your personality to come out when you're talking in your manifesto. You want students to vote for you, not only for your good manifesto points, but because of who you are as a person. So that's really, really important to take into account. And this is probably a good example of a good manifesto point. If it were me, I'd probably even go a little bit further into what I would specifically do as a sabbatical officer, but obviously you may not have that level of detail or knowledge yet, and that's completely fine. Like, don't panic if you don't know everything. You're not going to know everything when you're just candidates. So you don't have to like go into a detailed plan, because you also only have 400 words, but just saying, giving an example of what you would do is really beneficial. Okay, over to Fern.
Brilliant, thank you. So the next manifesto is an okay example of a manifesto. So as you can see, they've highlighted in bullet points the measures that they want to put in place. And also the fact that they've been a previous sabbatical officer, so they're aware of how the union works and the policies, procedures that the union and the university have to go through. So that's a really good example of showcasing previous skills or experience that you have within the university. Using this in the right way is really key. So although they've highlighted what they've previously done, when you're doing a manifesto, you want to make sure that you're able to communicate what you're hoping to do. So as they've said, like if elected, wanted to carry on the hard work in the current team and be visible and accountable. So within this, it's a good thing to say, but obviously you want to make sure that you're able to increase the awareness you have with students and be able to be more accountable and have that engagement with students. So the question I would ask to this one is, how are you going to do that? Within a manifesto, it's important that you follow through as to how you're going to achieve and how you're going to make your points realistic. So following on from this, obviously mentioned quite a few different points here of different areas they want to help. It's going to pick through some. So I think here, like I made a point earlier, it's just making sure that you're able to highlight how you're going to implement it and how you want to bring that as an idea forward, and maybe including here some of the contacts and networks, if you have some with the university, would be really important to make sure that you're able to show students that you have that foundation and knowledge, or maybe what you're going to do in preparation for your role, so how you can increase your networks and connections with the university. I think there's several points here where you would need to make sure that you had your connections within the university. For example here, more charitable work and fundraising, rather than just stating that, it might be a good idea to go from that and think, how am I going to increase my networks with the local community? Who am I going to work with? And maybe give some further measures on how you're going to implement that. And making sure that it's achievable as well. So making sure it's something that will be able to be implemented within a year. Thinking about timescales and things is really important.
Okay, cool. On to Manifesto 3 of 4. So this person is someone who's just left university. They've told us a bit about themselves straight away, which, like I said earlier, it is good. But I think here they've just given us it's a very formal opening. You can tell that they're a business management student, you know. So I think it's important maybe you just relay a bit more information about yourself, or a bit more fun information about yourself. Sabbatical officer elections are well, any election actually is meant to be a fun thing. It's meant to be something that not everyone does. So you know, make sure you're putting your points across, but make sure you try to keep it a bit, you know, keep it a bit light. They then go into it. This is they go into a bit of, you know, why education is important. You know, they're standing to be the head of student education. They're talking about why education is important to them, so you can tell that they're passionate. But they use, of their 400 words, they spend 122, so over a quarter of their words, on why education specifically is important. They don't talk about what necessarily they would do to help students. They don't talk about how they would represent students. They do come to that a little bit here, saying I will support course reps, but that's a core part of the role anyway for head of student education. So it's good to see that someone is passionate, but you need to make sure that you're actually highlighting some points. You need to make sure you're saying what you'll do. Otherwise, this manifesto doesn't actually tell anyone what anyone's going to do. It doesn't tell you what they would work on, how they would improve student rights, how they would work for the better student experience. You know, they're just telling us they're passionate about the role. So although you can see they want it really badly, I would say this is not the best manifesto I've seen, because apart from the highlighted key manifesto points at the beginning, which again, they don't expand on at any point, it's not telling us anything. So it's really important that you make sure that you are telling us your points. The whole reason why you have a manifesto. Okay, fun.
So finally, we've got the bottom one here, you can see. So obviously it's highlighting some of the key points, but there isn't much explanation from them, using things like better communication. That's a very kind of vague thing to say. It's a very broad thing that's quite difficult to follow on if there's no further information as to how you're going to implement it. Same with increased funding for course reps. How are you going to do that? Being able to further explain how you're going to do it is really key here. More representation, it kind of says the same thing again. There needs to be more context as to what you're saying, and maybe giving a bit of obviously further down it says about being passionate, which is really important, but using that passion in the right way, having experience of representing students by being a member of the student council, that's good to mention. It's good for to make students aware of what you're currently involved with the union, and how that can relate to your role in the future. So they're aware of how the SU works, but here you just need more information really about how you would go about implementing some of the points. There isn't really a follow-on from how to go forward with it. But yeah, like I said, mentioning that you're passionate, and any involvement that you've had previously is really beneficial, because it's making students aware of how what you're aware of, and also how you hope to make a difference. So they've kind of, at the bottom there, they've kind of repeated themselves, saying, as I previously said about student council, I would maybe suggest looking at alternative ways of showing the experience you have, or any additional roles you may have taken, whether it's within societies or a student officer role, anything like that can be of benefit to go into your manifesto.
Yeah, I agree. I think the only thing I would add to that as well is I've just noticed this myself, where they say here, I would make sure that the student hears no news about what the SU is actually doing. There's some subtext there that students don't know what a student union is. And whether that is true or not, you need to consider the fact that if you win the election and you say things like this in your manifesto, you've already not made a good impression, and you have to work with these people. And it's the same about saying things about the university. If you say like, oh, the university isn't very good or anything like that, and then you end up having to work with staff members at the university, they're not going to take that on board very kindly. Like, and trust me when I say staff members keep an eye on who gets elected and what their manifestos are. So keep that in mind when you're writing a manifesto. And I'm sure Fern will tell you she works very closely with the university.
Definitely, at all levels as well.
Yeah. Okay, cool. So we're going to expand a little bit on what we just saw in the manifestos by telling you like some things to do and what not to do when you're looking for a manifesto. So when you are writing a manifesto, it is really important to do some background research. So like before you start writing the manifesto, take a look at like the SU and university, what they're doing for students. Like understand, like taking a look at the websites even, just to understand what's currently happening there. Maybe where are the things that you would pick out that could be done better, or maybe there's something that we or the university have missed. And then using your network to your advantage. So asking your course mates and your friends how students are feeling and what issues are currently affecting them is very important. We come again a little bit to having shared perspective, but if you focus simply on what you believe needs to change and not what students as a whole needs to change, then you're missing a key demographic, because we have a lot of diversity in the university, and we need to make sure, and you need to make sure that you are accessing that if you're going to have the best possible chance.
Brilliant. So the next one is looking at the union's values as well and seeing how your personality fits in with it. So for example, we've mentioned about being passionate, being honest, integrity, so showing that you're dedicated, and also values such as inclusiveness, equality and diversity are really important. Obviously you're representing a large proportion of students, so you want to make sure that you're able to cater for all students' needs, and being able to reach out to a diverse audience, thinking about the different student groups that you will be working with and how you can be of benefit. And showcasing your experience in the area as well. So how you might have dealt with a certain student group, how have you made a difference in the past, and how would you take that knowledge forward in your role?
Absolutely. So obviously this year, it's because of the pandemic, we're running an online only election. So you're going to have to consider how you can communicate with different students via different online tools, and we would encourage you to use like as many different communication tools you could that you want. Things like obviously Facebook, Twitter, Instagram are the obvious ones, but Discord servers, if you use Twitch, if you use YouTube, anything like that, we really encourage you to use all of those things, just to make sure that you are showcasing yourself as much as possible and you're getting your point out there to as many different people as possible. If you have any questions about anything like that, just drop me an email at elections@solent.ac.uk. I'll put the email in the chat in a minute, just so you're clear on any points. But yeah.
So the next one is looking at how you can bullet point your main manifesto points. And for this one, I would say definitely try and use the SMART framework. So making sure it's specific, measurable, achievable, realistic and timely. And then going from that, making sure that below each point, where possible, you're able to highlight how you would implement it, and what further measures might be needed in order to achieve it. I think the main thing for this one is making sure it's achievable, and you using the SMART framework, it will really help you with that.
Okay, so making sure that you do a draft. If you do a draft of your manifesto, you'll be able to like do it, go away, come back and see if your points make sense, see if they're cohesive, easily digestible, and that your manifesto stands out. Like making sure that your manifesto reads well and it's something which students will understand is very, very important. So obviously, if it is something which is very lengthy, if there's a lot of paragraphs in there and not much spaces in between, it might be difficult to read and students might switch off straight away. So make sure it is digestible and make sure that your points are very easy to understand and that they are like well written. Spell check is your friend, but we'll come back to that.
Brilliant. So the next one focuses on how to make your manifesto stand out. So thinking of ways which students are likely to want to engage and be attracted to your manifesto. So maybe trying to avoid writing kind of an essay of what you want to include, try and condense it down a bit, make sure that your points are easy to read, easy to understand, easy for students to process, but also doing it in a way which maybe is eye-catching, but using colours and fonts that are easy for students to read and understand.
Yeah, so familiarizing yourself with the job description and understand what being a SABS involves is really important. This kind of goes back to the doing some research bit. But obviously, if you know what the job description is and you know what your core feature, what your core like job role functions are going to be before you start, you can avoid putting that and repeating yourself in your manifesto because you know that's what will be expected of you anyway. Your manifesto is going to be your own points and how you're going to represent students.
Brilliant. So here we talk about a little bit about understanding your privilege. So making sure that within your manifesto you are covering all students, you are representing all students and not just a specific student group that you might be in or something related to your course, making sure that it's broader, that it's accessible and inclusive to all students is really important, and trying not to use phrases such as I will, maybe look at using alternative ways to say things, trying not to promise students, fixing students' issues, try and be kind of a bit more transparent and kind of explain how you're intending to do that, but able to understand that it's not always as easy as it may first look.
Okay, and then you want to use your university network to come with a wide range of issues. So I mentioned this earlier. Obviously, you want to make sure that you're talking to your course mates, you're talking to your friends about what they've experienced is, what's their Solent experience been, and that will help you to inform what you believe a wider manifesto issue could look like. You know, you might not even realize what some of your course mates have been through with some student issues, like where have they run into some obstacles, and that'll be a really good way to make your manifesto stand out as if you have a wider range of issues. Okay, I'm very conscious that we only have 6.5 minutes left, so we're gonna have to speed through these a little bit now. But if you do have any questions, like I say, pop me an email and I will get back to you, or one of us will get back to you. So, things to avoid. Avoid some jargon and buzzwords. So, as much as possible, like there are some key phrases which students will immediately switch off at, like elections, for instance. No one likes the word elections. Enhancing your student experience, enriching your student experience, you know, anything like that. Like Also, I'm going to include Make Solent Great Again, because we have now heard that every year since 2017, and the joke is old. So there's no point saying it. It's just going to switch people off more than anything. If you wish to still do that, it's completely up to you. But I would not personally recommend it. But yeah, try to avoid that where possible.
And making sure you're using spell check and proofreading your work is really important, because obviously you want to make sure that you're coming across in the right way, and it can have a bad influence of the way you want to come across if you've not checked your spelling. But yeah.
So as I said earlier, try not to use combative language when talking about the SU or the university, as you might end up working with them. So obviously, when you are saying some things that I definitely wouldn't directly slander the university or the SU, because that's in our rules, which we'll go through next week. But making sure that, you know, you can say, whilst there are some ways you can improve it, just don't say anything's bad or anyone particularly is bad, because if you end up winning, that's not going to be great for you.
Yeah, and like we've previously kind of touched upon, making sure that you're able to kind of be transparent with the wording that you use and not make promises, and understanding that you need to kind of be more realistic and address current issues that students might be facing. So some background research is really important for that one.
So kind of expanding from that, don't make promises you can't keep. Be realistic, address current issues that are happening, you know, and there are a plethora of issues to pick out from right now. But obviously, if you're going to promise students that by 2025 we're going to have a campus on the moon, people aren't going to believe you. So, you know, make sure it is things you can keep, make sure it's things you can follow through on, or at least things that you think are attainable. You may not know that they're not attainable for whatever reason, and that's fine. But as long as they're a reasonable issue, it'll be fine.
And make sure that you are taking the time to write a manifesto. So you'll be amazed at how people don't. And they also making sure that you have a photo so people know who you are. They can recognise you if you're going to specific student groups for further feedback. That's another really good way of gaining kind of student knowledge.
Okay, and finally, like we said earlier, avoid just using your own knowledge. Speak to students, speak to as many students as you physically can within our current climate. You know, making sure you have that shared experience and you're talking to lots of different people will be really, really important in ensuring that you have a broad range of issues which covers a lot of different student demographics and sectors. So we're going to talk to you now about some issues currently in the sector, so that you have a bit of an understanding about, if you didn't know this already, about what some national issues are, what some of the Solent specific issues are, if you're struggling for some ideas. But like I say, I would very much do your own research, and I would have a look into what we've got going on. You've got until the 22nd of this month, which is next Monday, to do your manifesto. So there's still a lot of time to do it. So one of the first issues that's happening right now, you may have seen, I don't know, everywhere in the news, is that the rent rebates issue is currently raging. So obviously, where some students are dissatisfied about the quality or the amount of time they've been able to be into lectures and have that physical learning, a lot of universities, well, some universities are starting to think about how sorry, I've just completely gone to no detriment policy. So I'm going to talk about no detriment policy. Where that is a thing, you know, does that mean rebates? You know, no detriment policy, does that mean that grades need to be adjusted like they were last year? Does that affect all the courses? And does that affect or does it only affect certain courses? If so, why does that only affect certain courses? Those are a lot of things you need to talk about with no detriment policy. Those are the type of things you need to understand. It's not too hard to look up. There should be quite a storied history on it. I think something went through Student Council actually quite recently about it as well, if you look at the SU website. But yeah, Fern, if you want to talk about rent rebates, because I started rambling about something completely different.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. So at the moment, obviously students both in private accommodation and the university accommodation, some students aren't currently back in their accommodation, or they'll be coming back soon, but kind of it's depending on the government restrictions and things. So understanding that that could potentially be something to look into, and how we support students with that process, and making sure that if there is complaints going in, that you address it and that you're listening to the student body and taking that forward to the university.
Okay, and then obviously as well, it's important to think about the return to campus. It's something which is maybe not looming for this academic year, but if you're a sabbatical officer for next year, it will be a really big thing, the return to campus, you know, when everyone is vaccinated, when we're able to do it. How will that transition work? How will you as a sabbatical officer ease a transition? How will you make sure that students feel safe to return to campus? All those kind of issues are things you'll need to consider.
Yeah, and I think furthering on from that, highlighting how courses will work in 2021-22 is another really important factor. Our university is quite a creative university. There's a lot of courses which require specialist equipment and facilities. So thinking about how that return to campus is going to be safe, but also cater to all students' needs, and ensuring that they do have access to the essential equipment that they need to complete their courses.
Yeah, and how will students receive the level of support they need on these courses? You know, making sure that students will be able to get the level of support they need in 21-22 if we aren't completely back on campus yet, or maybe even just in the return to campus, we will be very out of step with how being on campus physically actually is. You know, it's been what, since March 2020 was the last time we had students on campus properly. So it might take some time, adjustment to get back into the flow of things. You know, how will the pandemic have changed how the university works and kind of getting that level of support? Maybe there's some things they did during the pandemic which would be removed in the future, which we might still need. It'll be really important to consider that when you're thinking about students getting support during the next academic year.
So the next one I've briefly kind of covered, but specialist equipment and resources. So looking at different resources and facilities available for students on a broader scale, but being able to support students in accessing the equipment in line with the return to campus, and making sure that they're able to still get access to the equipment and facilities they need. For example, the Hatch, which has a lot of media and technology equipment that a large proportion of some of the media courses do use on a frequent basis. How is that going to be kind of managed, and how could you support students within that area, but also within the wider student community, and addressing any student feedback?
Fern, do you want to go on to the next point as well, because this is kind of your area?
Yeah, definitely. So obviously societies at the moment, its majority is online, making sure that there's definitely a need for increasing that engagement with societies, but also making sure you're able to sustain them. So looking at how when things go back to normal, hopefully return to campus next year, how you're going to implement events and activities with the restrictions, for example, risk assessments that the university have put in place, any safety measures, and making sure you're able to do it in a manner where students feel safe to come on campus and get involved if it's allowed to happen.
Yeah, so it's also looking at alternate ways of delivering key activities. You know, there's no guarantee that all students will be back on campus in September, October, November. And during that period, you know, we have our freshers program, we have our by-elections which will need to be run. We will have a lot of coursework training, society training, introduction to SU training, things that if all students aren't back on campus, sorry, someone's trying to destroy my house. If not everyone is back on campus at that time, then it will be very hard, you know, to deliver some of those key activities. It'll be looking at how we can do a hybrid way of doing it, or just an online only way of doing it, and what's that going to look like for students.
Yeah, and finally, obviously mentioning hardship funding. So making sure that students are able to get access to support and funding from the university where they need to, and looking at making sure that things like the funding criteria are inclusive, and making sure it's an equal opportunity for all students to have the opportunity to apply and get the support they need.
Okay, cool. That was a lot of information, but like we say, this will be posted on the Candidate Hub afterwards, so you'll be able to take a look back at anything that you may have missed. We'll open it to some questions. We've already had one in the chat from Stefania. So is it until the 19th when the flyers and campaign should be done as well, or just the manifesto? And one last question, can you say the deadline for the cost forms? Okay, so the deadline for the manifesto and the artwork to be completed is at the same time. It's the 22nd of February at midday. So that is next Monday at midday. You have to do both your manifesto and your artwork. As for the expenses deadline, that is I believe that is 12. I'll double check this and confirm, but I believe it is midday on the last day of voting, which is the 5th of March. So I will cover this again in candidate briefing, but please make sure you all send in your expenditure forms. It is a really important thing to make sure that you're all working within the rules of the election, that you've given each other the equal opportunity and you've stayed within the budget. Even if you don't spend any money, you need to send that form through to me. I'll cover that in more detail next week, like I say, but yes. Did that answer your question?
Yes, thank you. I was trying to find the student hub, the one that you said.
The candidate hub.
The candidate, sorry.
Yeah, no, that's cool. We can get a link into the candidate hub in a second.
Yep, I will share a link, and also you should, if you've already nominated yourselves, you should have received an email from us yesterday, which will have a direct link to the candidate hub. It's literally just a sub page of the Solent Decides page, so it is on the sidebar as well, but I'll pop a link in the chat when I find it on my computer.
And it will be the same place where I should submit my artwork and the manifest and everything. I should find them there.
Yeah, so you'll find all the details there for submitting artwork. It is it's another link which I'll pop in the chat. That's okay. I've got so many tabs open, I can't find anything right now.
And now it's the same with me for my dissertation. I have hundreds and I can't find anything.
So that's the in the chat is the link to the candidate hub, and I will get up the artwork link, submission link for you, and we'll make sure all of this is updated on the candidate hub when like over the weekend, basically, so when everyone's finalizing everything.
Yeah, and for your expenses, you'll get given 2 reminders throughout the voting week that you need to send them through to my email directly with a form, and that'll all be on the candidate hub, and we'll email you.
Okay, thank you. That's why I was afraid, because last time when we have the election, you said it is compulsory, and if you don't send this, you can not win or anything. Like.
Yeah, absolutely. So last year when we did our elections last year, we had a lot of students who didn't submit their expense forms, and so we had to refer that to the returning officer, and the returning officer disqualified about 65% of the candidates, 70% of the candidates. So it is something which is really crucially important. It's a very small thing, But like you say, like if you don't do it, like you can get disqualified. So yeah, we'll give you lots of reminders though. So just check your emails throughout the voting week.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions?
What's the maximum amount we're allowed to spend on the campaign?
So you are allowed to spend £20 on your campaign. You can spend whatever, you can spend that on whatever you want to do with your campaign. You just need to make sure that you save a receipt and you send it through to us with your expenses. And it's worth saying at this point that if you go over that amount, if you go over £20 in any way, so even if you go over by a penny, that's considered unfair and you leave yourself open to action from the returning officer. So keep it below £20. Okay, any more questions about the manifestos? I'm seeing some shaking of heads, so I'm going to presume that's everything. If you do have any more questions, you can, like I say, you can get in touch with me at elections@solent.ac.uk. You should all be getting an email from me on Friday evening or Saturday morning. There's the artwork submission link in the chat. You should be getting an email me about some next steps and some things you need to look out for over the next week or so. But apart from that, thanks to everyone for coming, and I will hopefully see you all in the candidate briefings next week.